They called him Big Tuna, a man so feared that even other mob bosses whispered his name. Tony Accardo was the undisputed ruler of the Chicago outfit, the final authority on life and death for anyone who crossed the organization. On January 11, 1958, in the soundproof basement of his fortress-like mansion on Chicago's North Side, Accardo delivered an ultimatum that would destroy the greatest love story in Hollywood history. "Mr. Davis," he said, his voice deadly calm, "you have exactly 24 hours to marry a black woman. If you're not at an altar by tomorrow night, my boys will make sure you never see another woman again, permanently." This wasn't a negotiation. This wasn't a business meeting. This was a death sentence with a 24-hour reprieve. And Sammy Davis Jr., the most talented entertainer in America, had to choose between love and life in the most impossible way imaginable. What happened in those 24 hours wouldn't just destroy Sammy's romance with Kim Novak. It would break his heart so completely that he would never fully recover. This is the story of the most terrifying ultimatum in entertainment history, delivered by the most dangerous man in organized crime. To understand why Tony Accardo cared about Sammy Davis Jr.'s love life, you have to understand the man behind the threat. Accardo wasn't just another mob boss. He was the mob boss, the man who had survived decades in organized crime by being smarter, more ruthless, and more calculating than anyone else. Unlike the flashy gangsters who courted publicity and lived ostentatiously, Accardo operated from the shadows. He owned judges, controlled politicians, and commanded an army of killers who followed his orders without question. When Accardo wanted someone eliminated, they disappeared so completely that their own families never found the bodies. But Accardo's real power came from his understanding of America's social order. He knew that the mob's criminal empire depended on maintaining certain boundaries, certain unwritten rules that kept the broader society from turning completely against organized crime. And in 1950s America, one of those unwritten rules was absolute. Black men did not date white women, especially not when those white women belonged to Hollywood's power elite. Sammy's relationship with Kim Novak had been conducted in absolute secrecy for over a year. They were madly in love, planning a future together despite the obvious dangers. But their relationship had caught the attention of Harry Cohn, the tyrannical head of Columbia Pictures, who owned Kim's contract and considered her his personal property. Cohn's reaction to the relationship was swift and vicious. He didn't waste time with warnings or negotiations. He went straight to the top of the Chicago outfit, to Tony Accardo himself, and demanded that the problem be solved permanently. The meeting between Cohn and Accardo took place in early January 1958 in the back room of an Italian restaurant on Chicago's West Side. Cohn explained the situation with barely controlled rage. His biggest star was romantically involved with a black entertainer, threatening to destroy her career and his investment. "I don't care how you handle it," Cohn told Accardo, "but this ends now. Kim Novak is worth millions to my studio, and I won't let some jungle bunny destroy that." Accardo listened without comment, calculating the implications of the request. The Chicago outfit had significant investments in the entertainment industry, relationships that generated enormous profits through legitimate and illegitimate channels. Protecting those investments was worth almost any price, but more importantly, Accardo understood the symbolic importance of enforcing racial boundaries. If a black entertainer could openly date a white movie star without consequences, it would encourage other blacks to challenge the social order that kept them in their designated place. "Consider it handled," Accardo told Cohn, "but this kind of problem-solving isn't free." The arrangement was simple. Cohn would owe the Chicago outfit a substantial favor to be collected at Accardo's discretion. In return, Sammy Davis Jr.'s relationship with Kim Novak would end immediately and permanently. The summons came on January 10, 1958. Sammy was performing at a nightclub in Chicago when two men in expensive suits approached his dressing room. They didn't announce themselves or explain their presence. They simply delivered a message that made Sammy's blood run cold. "Mr. Accardo wants to see you tomorrow morning. 10 o'clock sharp. Don't be late." Sammy knew exactly who Tony Accardo was and what the summons meant. You didn't get invited to meet with Accardo, you got ordered. and those orders were usually the last thing people heard before they disappeared forever. That night was the longest of Sammy's life. He considered running, fleeing to Europe or South America, anywhere Accardo's reach couldn't extend. But he knew it was useless. The Chicago outfit had connections everywhere, and running would only confirm his guilt and make the eventual punishment worse. He considered calling Kim, warning her about what was happening, but he couldn't risk putting her in danger. If Accardo was willing to threaten him over their relationship, there was no telling what the mob might do to Kim herself. So Sammy spent the night in his hotel room, chain-smoking cigarettes and staring at the ceiling, knowing that the next morning would either end his relationship or his life. Accardo's mansion was a fortress disguised as a luxury home. High walls, armed guards, and surveillance cameras that tracked every movement on the property. The basement where Accardo conducted his most serious business was soundproof, windowless, and designed to contain screams that no one would ever hear. Sammy was escorted downstairs by 2 silent bodyguards who took positions by the only exit. The room was spartanly furnished, a plain wooden table, 2 chairs, and a single overhead light that cast harsh shadows on the concrete walls. Accardo was already seated when Sammy entered, studying a file folder that contained photographs and documents. He didn't look up when Sammy sat down, letting the silence stretch out until the tension was unbearable. Finally, Accardo spoke, his voice completely devoid of emotion. "Mr. Davis, do you know why you're here?" Sammy tried to project confidence he didn't feel. "I assume it has to do with my personal life." Accardo looked up from the file, his cold eyes fixing on Sammy with predatory intensity. "Your personal life stopped being personal the moment you decided to fuck a white woman. Especially a white woman who belongs to people we do business with." The crude language was deliberate, designed to strip away any romantic illusions about what Sammy's relationship represented to men like Accardo. "Mr. Accardo," Sammy began, "Kim and I." "Kim and you nothing," Accardo interrupted. "This conversation isn't about what you want or what you think you feel. This is about reality. And the reality is that black men don't date white movie stars in America. Not now, not ever." Accardo opened the file folder and spread photographs across the table. Images of Sammy and Kim together, taken with telephoto lenses by mob surveillance teams. Intimate moments that had been captured and weaponized. "We know everything," Accardo continued. "Every phone call, every meeting, every plan you've been making. This ends today, or you end today." The threat was delivered so casually that it took Sammy a moment to process its full meaning. Tony Accardo, one of the most powerful men in organized crime, was threatening to kill him over his choice of romantic partner. "I'm going to make this very simple for you," Accardo said, leaning forward across the table. "You have exactly 24 hours to marry a black woman. Not next week, not next month. 24 hours. Sammy stared at him in disbelief. "That's impossible. I can't just—" "You can and you will." Accardo cut him off. "Because the alternative is that my boys pay you a visit and take away the other eye, along with anything else that might be useful to an entertainer." The reference to Sammy's previous car accident, which had cost him his left eye, was particularly cruel. Accardo was threatening not just death, but mutilation designed to end Sammy's career before ending his life. "Find a black girl, any black girl," Accardo continued. "Pay her if you have to. Marry her tomorrow night. Make sure the newspapers know about it. And never contact Kim Novak again." Accardo stood up from the table, signaling that the meeting was over. 24 hours, Mr. Davis. After that, this problem solves itself permanently." The next 24 hours were a nightmare of panic and desperation. Sammy's first call was to Kim, to tell her their relationship was over without being able to explain why. The conversation was heartbreaking. Kim couldn't understand why the man she loved was suddenly cutting her out of his life. "Did I do something wrong?" she asked, tears evident in her voice. "No," Sammy said, his own voice breaking. "You're perfect. But this has to end. I can't see you anymore, ever." Finding a wife in less than 24 hours seemed impossible, but Sammy was desperate enough to try anything. His frantic search led him to Lorraine White, a young black chorus girl he had dated casually several months earlier. The phone call to Lorray was surreal in its desperation. "Lorray, I need you to marry me tomorrow. I can't explain why, but I'll give you $25,000 cash if you say yes right now." The amount was staggering for 1958, enough to buy a house or live comfortably for years. But the desperation in Sammy's voice convinced Lorray that this wasn't a joke or a romantic gesture. It was something much more serious. "Sammy, you're scaring me. What's going on?" "I can't tell you. But if you trust me, if you care about me at all, please say yes." Lorray, perhaps sensing that Sammy's life depended on her answer, agreed. The wedding took place on January 12, 1958, exactly 23 hours and 47 minutes after Accardo's deadline. It was held at a small chapel in Las Vegas with minimal fanfare but maximum publicity. Photographers had been contacted to ensure the marriage made headlines. Sammy stood at the altar in his best suit, but his eyes were empty. This wasn't a celebration of love, it was a surrender to terror. Lorray wore a hastily purchased wedding dress, still confused about why she was participating in this bizarre ceremony. The minister performed the service quickly, perhaps sensing the strange atmosphere surrounding the event. When he pronounced them husband and wife, Sammy kissed Lorray mechanically, for the cameras rather than from any genuine emotion. The photographs appeared in newspapers across the country the next morning. Sammy Davis Jr. surprises fans with sudden marriage. The coverage was exactly what Accardo had demanded. Public proof that Sammy was safely married to a black woman, eliminating any scandal about his relationship with Kim Novak. But the human cost was devastating. 3 lives had been destroyed to maintain the racial boundaries that men like Accardo considered essential to social order. Sammy was trapped in a loveless marriage based on fear. Lorray was unknowingly participating in a mob scheme. And somewhere in Hollywood, Kim Novak was crying herself to sleep, wondering what she had done to lose the man she loved. The marriage to Lorray lasted less than 2 years, ending in a quiet divorce that freed both parties from a relationship that should never have existed. But the psychological damage to Sammy was permanent. He never fully recovered from the trauma of being forced to abandon the woman he loved. Friends said he carried Kim's memory for the rest of his life, never forgetting the relationship that had been murdered by men who couldn't tolerate love that crossed racial lines. Tony Accardo never spoke publicly about his role in ending Sammy's relationship, but FBI surveillance recordings from the period reveal his satisfaction with the outcome. In one wiretapped conversation, he was heard telling an associate, "The boy learned his lesson. Sometimes you have to break people to teach them their place." The ultimatum Accardo delivered in that Chicago basement wasn't just about one couple or one relationship. It was about maintaining a system of racial control that extended from the segregated South to the supposedly liberal world of entertainment. It was about demonstrating that even the most successful black entertainer in America could be controlled, manipulated, and broken if he forgot the rules of racial hierarchy. Most importantly, it was about the power of organized crime to enforce social norms through violence and intimidation, turning love into a luxury that only people with the right skin color could afford. When Tony Accardo died in 1992, Sammy Davis Jr. had been dead for 2 years. But the ultimatum Accardo delivered in 1958 had defined the rest of Sammy's life, a constant reminder that in America, love was never really free if you were black. The 24 hours Accardo gave Sammy to live weren't just about finding a wife. They were about learning that even the most basic human emotion could be weaponized by men who understood that controlling hearts was more effective than breaking bodies. Sammy survived those 24 hours, but he never escaped their shadow. For the rest of his life, every relationship was complicated by the memory of what had been taken from him. Every moment of happiness was shadowed by the knowledge that it could be destroyed by men who saw love as just another form of business transaction. The ultimatum had accomplished exactly what Tony Accardo intended. It had broken Sammy's spirit so completely that he never again forgot his place in the racial hierarchy. And that, more than any amount of money or violence, was how the mob maintained control over the people they considered their property.